Hey guys, so in this video I just wanted to cover some suggestions and a handful of ways that animators can make their scenes more presentable when they're playblasting the shots for their demo reel. If you've read any of my articles or heard me talk on it before, you'll know that I'm not a big advocate for animators going too far and spending too much of their time with lighting and rendering, compositing their shots. I'm all for having a friend do that. Usually get my shots lit by other people or whatever if I want to have them that level of presentable for my reel. But there are a number of shortcuts, tips and tricks that you can employ to at least present your work in the best light possible, even in playblast form, that will really help your animation shine, and that will help there not be distracting things taken away from your animation. That's basically the bottom line, is you don't want any sort of artifacts or anything distracting or confusing that's going to take away from your animation work. You don't have to go so far and spend a lot of time doing high level advanced rendering techniques, but there's a couple kind of quick easy things you can do that won't take a lot of your time away from animating, but will present your work in the best light possible. So I just want to go through some ideas, some suggestions, some thought processes on just a really simple scene here, and then you can apply that to your work. And if you have any questions or other things you want me to go into more detail, feel free to just drop something or any suggestions in the comments section. So here I have a really simple scene, just some basic primitives here I've got a camera set up, and this is my perspective view. So a couple of things right away. If I were to want to play blast this for my reel, there's a couple like really quick things I can do to make sure this is going to be as presentable as possible. One thing is I never want my grid or any of my like my view axis or any of that stuff showing in a play blast. So I want to turn off everything that's not going to be beneficial for that. You can actually go down here in the bottom to play blast display and kind of preset what you want showing for your playblast. So I know in this case I only want my polygons in this case showing, so I don't want the grid or any other stuff. And then in my actual playblast settings, I want to make sure also that show ornaments is off, so that way I'm not going to have my camera names or any of this stuff showing, my resolution, view axis, any of that. So I want to make sure all of that stuff is turned off, just to give me a clean blast for starters. Another thing I like to do is just make sure that I'm blasting at a high enough resolution. So in my render settings, I'll usually try to set this to like at least like at least like HD 720, but usually like full HD 1080, just so I have enough actual pixel information there to be beneficial, and so I'm not going to get like graininess or a lot of pixelation or anything like that. So another thing I highly recommend as you're setting up your shot for render, again, I'll turn off the grid and just turn on my polygons, is to take advantage of the viewport 2.0 options. There's a lot of things that with just a single click can actually make your scene a lot more presentable. A lot of them are here across the top of your viewport, but you can also get into more details with their settings here in the actual, if you go under Render Viewport 2.0 to the options box. So a few of the ones in particular that I like to utilize are anti-aliasing, which deals with the display around the edges of objects, particularly objects that are on like an angle or that are straight lines. If you see even these things that I know are straight lines, like the edges of my cube, look really jagged right now at this resolution and this display. But if I turn on anti-aliasing, which I can do by hitting this button here, it will do its best to smooth that out. And the more samples, the better that will look. I don't have a particularly good graphics card on this computer, so my sample count I think is maxed at 8, but if you have a better graphics card, I think usually at work or whatever, this goes up at least to 16. And the higher that count goes, the smoother this will be. Keep in mind that turning some of these things on will slow your scene down, so you don't really want to do this until you're ready to play blast. While you're working in the view, it's okay for this to be a little jagged. It doesn't really affect how your animation looks to you as you're cleaning up your curves or whatever like that. But when you're ready to play blast, you want to put your best foot forward and make everything presentable. I recommend turning that on and then playing around with samples to see what's going to give you the best bang for your buck without taxing your graphics card too much, depending on what hardware you have. Another one that's really beneficial is ambient occlusion. And it basically has to do with, you'll see when I turn it on here, you kind of get this sense of like context shadows where things are touching or overlapping, particularly, you know, a lot of times on characters, you'll have like, without this on, you'll notice that like inside of a character's mouth is lit up really bright in an unnatural sort of way. So if you turn on ambient occlusion, you'll get a better sense of the dark sides of things. So just with these 2 button clicks, this actually looks a lot better, a lot more presentable. This one in the middle here is motion blur. Let me actually just set a quick key in here so we can kind of see what that's doing. So say in this, well, that's stupid. Sorry. Maybe the ball just drops in, right? And that's my animation, right? So if I turn on motion blur, you'll see it'll actually try to give a instance of what that might look like. And there's some settings here that you can play with for how long the shutter is open, you know, depending on how fast your thing's moving. But you see it's attempting to give me a motion blur there. And if I play with these settings, I can get a longer or shorter blur. This one's a little bit finicky. Again, if you've got better hardware, it kind of does a better job at it without taxing your system too much, but it's not always super accurate compared to like a rendered motion blur. But sometimes if you have a fast action on something that's just a transform, it will give you a decent result. I find if something's actually a rigged deform, it won't motion blur the deformations. So if something's being driven by a rig, you're going to get kind of questionable results. But if it's just a, you know, simple object like this that's moving across, or a camera swiping across something, you can get a pretty good indicator of what motion blur might look like if you enable that. So again, you can enable that here in the hardware 2.0 settings, or this icon here will toggle that. So the few of those are the main ones I like to use for a viewport 2.0 settings that can go a long way in making your shot look a little more nicer and more presentable. So another thing, while I don't go into great like detail in terms of like actual shot lighting with, you know, with tons of lights, the different render passes and compositing them and stuff, I'll usually outsource that to a buddy if I want to take it to that level. But you can go ahead and drop some basic lights in your scene, and I'll go ahead and make this disclaimer: I am by no means a lighter, so save your comments on that. But I know enough to get by, probably enough just to get in trouble. But so in create lights, you can, you know, make all sorts of different lights. I like to use spotlights a lot, sometimes directional lights, sometimes point lights, depending on what we're doing. But let's say for the sake of this scene, I'm just going to throw a basic spotlight in here for starters. Let me show my lights. So one thing that's actually a pretty kind of neat, interesting trick, and this will come in handy more in a second. Let me go to my perspective view. Let's just throw this light in here. Go to my attribute editor. Let's make this cone a little wider, right? So what I like to do is basically follow like a basic 3-point lighting scheme. I'm not going to go into that too much in this particular video, but basically what that is a key light, which is kind of your primary light source, a fill light, which kind of fills in the shadowy side of things so they don't go too dark, and then a rim light, which is usually like behind your objects, just giving a little bit of that highlight on the edge. And I'll show that here in a second quickly, so that'll make a little more sense. So one thing, of course, if I'm using lights, I want to make sure I'm in 7 mode so I can see what the actual light is doing. So in my camera view, I'll go into 7 mode. But one trick I actually like to use, I'm actually just going to duplicate this light to just do this really quick. One trick I like to use as I'm setting up my lights is under lighting, you can use all lights, or you could use selected light, and that can be beneficial for seeing what the effect of each light is doing on its own separately, especially once you have a few lights in there. I'm also going to create a third light. I'm just going to make a directional light for my rim. So I'm going to call this first light I made my key light. We're going to call this the fill light, or sometimes you hear it called bounce light. And then the directional light here in the back, I'm going to call my rim light. So by having it in this mode where it's only showing the light that's selected, I find that useful for, especially for my rim light, to see how that's going to look. So for my rim light, I just want to catch just like a little bit of highlight on the backside of my objects, like that. So I get that little bit of, you know, crescent on the sphere. I might up that intensity a little bit. And then for my key light, this is my primary light, I might go a little less bright on that, something like that. And then see how my shadow side goes really pretty dark on the cube and stuff. So I might use my fill light, and I usually don't go very bright with that. And I just go, you know, give it a little bit of fill from this side, just so my shadows don't go as dark. So this is just a quick sloppy version. But then if I do use all lights, I can see what my 3-point lighting is doing there. And it might be something like that. And then I can go in and, you know, play with these intensities of my 3 separate lights, play with the angles, whatever. Another thing that's nice to do is turn on your shadows. So under lighting, I can turn on shadows, and I'm getting shadows now. By default, I think maybe all of these might be casting. Yeah, all of these are casting shadows by default, but I can turn that off in their actual each individual lights setting, depending on what I'm going for there. But so now, you know, if I were to turn back on my ambient occlusion, this is probably going to tax my. I'm gonna leave motion blur off for now. But now with my ambient occlusion and my anti-aliasing on, you know, I'm getting a better looking scene already, which is nice. Another thing I might do is throw some sort of background in here, but I can also change my background. If I hit Alt-B, it'll cycle through the different preset background colors, and you know that this gradient is one of them. But if I go under Settings Preferences, under Windows, Settings Preferences, I can go to Color Settings, 3D Views, and I can actually set the colors of this gradient. So if I wanted to just make this like a sky or something that kind of fades from like blue to like a white or something like that, I can play with the colors of that and get a gradient as my background sky. So again, these are just some quick things to just apply to your scenes to make them a little more presentable before you do your play blast. I noticed that this is not on the ground, so this is floating. Okay, and I think that's inside the ground maybe. So, you know, if you're doing a shot with a character or something, obviously this can go a longer way. So now one thing I want to talk about is using cards as a background and or as foreground elements. So what I'm going to do is just create a polygon plane. Let's take down the subdivisions. Let me rotate that to camera 90 degrees. So what I'm going to do here is I have actually, and this is per one of my students' requests, he wanted to know a good way to do this. So I'm going to create, just going to open up my Hypershade, and we're just going to make another, just make a Lambert shader, Maya shader, drop that on there, and I'm going to navigate navigate quickly. So I'm going to go into texture mode. And so what I have here is this is just a card that has some grass, a grass texture, and this is in a PNG format, so it actually supports transparency. If I hit 6 mode here, you'll see. So it supports transparency. So it's, if you use like a PNG or TIFF or certain formats that support transparency, you can get, you know, you can see it in your actual viewport. So what I would do with something like this is probably just duplicate and move this around a lot. Maybe flip it directions a little bit, and different heights, just varied up to. Oop, might do it quicker in perspective view. So I'm just going to dupe this a bunch of times, flat to my camera, basically just to give a sense of depth and variety to the grass. So I'm just using Control D to duplicate this a bunch of times and move it around just to give some thickness to my grass. As just an example. And, you know, vary the height and stuff, so it's not so obviously just duplicated. And then some of these, actually, if I want to scale it in -X, it'll just let me show you what that does. If I scale it in -X, it's basically just gonna reverse it, so it's going the other direction. And this is just another thing I can do for more variation, so it doesn't look like the same card duplicated over and over. But by doing that, I can quickly get, you know, something that sort of looks like you know, some simple grass in a scene. You know, if I duplicated that way more, obviously that would look better. I notice here that the top of my texture actually has a little bit of there's a little stripe across the top, and that's just because the image I chose wasn't great. But that's a quick example of how you could get like grass or something like that, and it's literally just, you know, faking some of that in front of the camera can make this look more lush. So one other thing I like to do, obviously this is a very, very simple scene, but I want to actually pull up my demo reel and talk about some of the other techniques I use for set dressing a scene. You say I'm doing a character talking, you know, just standing in front of the camera talking. It's boring to just have them on a plain gray background. I can give it a lot more context, a lot more interest, and kind of ground the shot in reality more if I give it some, you know, spend a little bit of time just grounding that. And there's a couple of ways that I like to do that personally that don't cause me a lot of time or having to try to like model stuff and texture and UV things, which are outside of my skill set. So let me just walk you through what I've done on some of these shots on my reel. So this first shot, you know, this is a pretty kind of fleshed out, lush environment. And I actually don't think I really modeled anything in here or textured anything. The only thing I actually think I modeled are these squares, these bricks, which I just put a bevel on some cubes and stacked them up in this way. But everything else you're seeing here is actually downloaded from turbosquid.com. None of it came all together, but with a little bit of patience, a little bit of vision and creativity, you can actually piece a lot of this together. So, you know, these were like individual barrels, and I searched for wine bottles, and I searched for these, you know, shelves, and I searched for a ladder, and each individual piece, and then put it together in such a way that it makes a pretty cohesive set. Now, this is one that I didn't even bother rendering or lighting or anything, but for the sake of this playblast, like I said, I could make it pretty presentable by grounding him in an actual environment instead of just standing in front of gray, which would have been a lot less interesting. And all of these assets actually came with textures already UV'd. So one thing that's nice to do when you go to TurboSquid, it's just turbosquid.com, and then you can, you know, you search for whatever you're looking for. So if we were looking for maybe a beach scene, we might type beach, you know, and you'll see beach umbrella, beach chair, or whatever. And then one thing that I like to do is, by default, it will sort by best match. And you'll see that some of these are really expensive. I wouldn't recommend spending $90 for a beach chair for a shot. But a lot of times you can find stuff that's cheap or free. And a lot of times, it's even if it's a few bucks, it's worth getting the textures and all of that. The time that it would take you to make that yourself or try to figure it out if you don't have those skills, it's usually worth it to do a few bucks. But if I switch this to sort by lower prices, a lot of times I'll find things that are absolutely free that might work fine. And they're not always the best quality assets, but, you know, like these chairs are kind of cool looking, right? For free. And then you just have to check and make sure it's in the format that you like, and you can actually sort it, you know, search by format if you want FBX or OBJ or MA or something that works with Maya, or if you're using another software, you can sort it by that. But, you know, even, you know, there's a lot of options that, you know, this is like really pretty nice asset. It's only, you know, $3. So if you're doing a beach scene and you don't want to waste 4 hours trying to model in texture and you know, rig up a beach chair, some assets are even rigged sometimes, but you know, it might just be worth it to throw a couple bucks at it, or even just use one of these free ones. So I've had a lot of luck with that. So that's what I've done in this scene. So this second scene, I've actually taken a different approach. What I've done here, this couch is 3D. This is an asset from TurboSquid. but this background is just an image. I literally just did a Google search and found an image, and that's all that this is. I blurred it out a little bit so it doesn't distract our eye, and it seems like it could fit within their world, and just threw it in the background. I threw these characters over it, and the couch was a nice addition because it allowed me to put them behind the couch but in front of the image without having to do any real compositing or anything. Then I'm just using, I don't remember if I'm doing this with depth of field in Maya, which you can turn on it with camera settings. That's another viewport 2.0 thing. You can use depth of field, or I think in this case I might have done this after the fact. In just a compositing program. I like to use like After Effects or Nuke or something like that, just to blur out that background. So we're just focused on our foreground characters. So this shot is another one where I haven't modeled a single thing in this shot. These rigs are from iAnimate, but all of these assets are from TurboSquid. The desk down to the fruit, the cookie, the juice boxes, everything already textured. The door, the chalkboard, everything. And then I had a friend, my friend Sarah, lit this for me. So she did the lighting and rendering and compositing of this shot. So that's one approach. And then this is another one where the hat, these books in the back, the pictures on the wall, the desk, the chair, all of this is from TurboSquid, and probably at max, I never pay more than like $5 for a prop, but I might piece together several different props to make my set. And then I had my friend Eric Kuna did a great job lighting and compositing this one. So that's another example of ways that you can just give a little more context to your shot and build out your set and make your animation presentable, whether you're doing just a play blast like this with the lighting and shadows like we talked about. In this case it's weird because these are casting weird shadows onto each other, all of these cards. But so this is a couple different examples I was showing together. But the anti-aliasing, the ambient occlusion, motion blur, all these types of things can really make your thing, really make your play blast a lot more visually interesting. So those are some tips, and hopefully that's helpful and useful, and hopefully I'll see a lot fewer animation shots where a character is just standing in front of a gray background. Like, spend a little bit of time and try to ground it, give it some context to help set your scene, make it a little more visually interesting, but don't go crazy doing it. Either get some friends to help with the modeling, or spend a little time digging around TurboSquid to throw it together. Find a nice Google image that's a similar camera angle and might work. Keeping in mind things like color palette and scale and things that are not going to be visually distracting. You want this to be supplemental and to help support the animation and not take away from it. So I hope that helps, and like I said, leave any suggestions or questions in the comments if anything's unclear with that. And yeah, happy animating.